Thomas and Friends has loads of characters. Some really loved, some really hated. Today we're talking about the character that can fall in either direction depending on who you are. Philip, character created by Mattel back in 2015 for the 19th season, and who became a pretty big deal throughout 2015 to 2018. However, his usage was definitely subdued. Does he deserve his polarizing reception? Let's get into it. Philip first popped up in season 19 with the episode The Little Engine Who Raced Ahead, and even got a sequel in Philip to the Rescue. And the character would start appearing sporadically throughout the remainder of the CGI era. In total, Philip got 5 major spotlight roles in his time on the show, and he played pretty heavily as a secondary character up until the end of the series. For a Mattel-made character, that's quite impressive. Characters like Timothy or Ryan, for example, had like 1-2 seasons where they were major and then just pop up in the background for the remainder of the series. But not Philip. Mattel never really gave up on Philip, nor the writing staff. He was almost always a major feature. I mean, he got to meet Hugo the Rail Zeppelin, everyone's favorite character, alongside Thomas, Percy, and James. The main characters. Bro be thinking he's a part of the team here. And no matter what you really think of Philip, it's hard to deny, Mattel definitely pushed the character to be a fairly major side character. Less, Ryan and Timothy, and more Rosie and Hero. Someone who will pop up a little more frequently, who has more to say to the main cast. If anything, Philip actually has relations with almost every major character in the show. Thomas is an obvious one, but, he shares a shed with Edward, he raced Gordon, he helped James in his accident, he was with Percy when he was talking about Henry's move to Vickerstown, he tried being best friends with Emily in season 24, and he had his episode with Toby and Toby's new friend. Yeah, all of the main 8 have some kind of connection to Philip. Maybe besides Nia and Rebecca, but who honestly likes them? And when it comes to Philip's actual starring episodes, they're fun, I would say, in my opinion. I don't think any of them are mind-blowing or really character-defining episodes. The closest I'd say was actually his last episode, Apology Impossible, where he actually has to stand up to James for constantly bullying him. And almost Philip's number from season 21, which gave him that kind of purpose of what does his number mean before ultimately choosing not to learn it. But in general, Philip episodes were never really about, progressing a story or really character development. A lot of them felt more like childlike, innocent fun. In many ways, a lot of what Percy used to have back in his early days. Maybe if the show kept going, they would have done more with him. Or maybe not, as he didn't get a starring role in 2 seasons in a row. But we'll never know for sure. Now let's get to Philip's personality. He's very young, he's very energetic, and he's pretty over the top. You can kind of tell by his mannerisms that he's not as experienced as some of the other characters in the series. And this does make him quite impressionable. I mean, he does think he won a race with Gordon, and did think that he was pulling more rolling stock than James back in his premiere episodes. Though he does slowly start to become more aware of his presence, specifically in Apology Impossible, where he realizes how badly James is treating him, and tries to actively stand up for himself. So you can clearly see that they do slowly start having Philip become more and more self-aware of things going on, though that doesn't stop him from having his more naive, childlike self. But I feel like they never really utilized him in a unique way compared to other major cast members. Not saying every character needs to be the most in-depth person imaginable. I mean, look at characters like Sydney or Ryan. They're very light and a lot of fun. But considering they had very few appearances, and Philip definitely was a character Mattel wanted to be more involved, it kind of makes me wish they were doing something specific. Mainly because they kinda already set something up with him and Thomas back in season 19.
That little box cap can be very cheeky sometimes.
Reminds me of a little tank engine who wanted to see the world.
As that clip shows, Thomas kinda was the one they wanted to be like his mentor figure, like his Edward. And considering The Adventure Begins was the newest thing when season 19 came out, it does make a lot of sense why they'd want to go in this direction for Philip. We could have had like a little progression arc for Thomas. You know, he takes the place of Edward, mentoring Philip. They set it up so perfectly. Like, imagine if season 20 had an episode where Philip is being a little more loose in the yards with his childlike personality, and Thomas tries to take more control and shows him the way it's done because he had legit learned how to do all these things way back in the day. It would have been a lot of fun, but then we get to a Shed for Edward, and it feels like, okay, I guess we'll go that direction with Edward then. Only for them to never do anything with it. Edward and Philip are only acknowledged once as a pair in the Bwubba era, and then Philip will have appearances consistently without Edward, as if that never even happened. And reflecting on it, Philip could have been one of the coolest character ideas possible for Thomas, in the sense we could have seen what Thomas could become in an Edward-like state. But unfortunately, even though it feels like they set it up like that, and maybe had plans for it, nothing's ever been confirmed, we'll never get to see anything like that pop up. Now, before I really get into things people dislike about Philip completely, I wanted to quickly touch upon the Thomas Creator Collective, something I haven't really brought up heavily on this channel before because, well, it's not really a part of the TV show, but it was officially overseen by Mattel, and Philip appears a lot in it. It seems like they kinda dialed up his naive personality quite a bit in these, but it's kind of fun. I like his little dynamic with Diesel 10, and it does create a lot of funny moments with him. I honestly think here, amping him up a little more honestly made him a little more entertaining. But again, they never really go too in-depth with the dude, like I've said about the main TV show itself. But I think escalating those personality traits has made him a little more interesting. Now let's get into what people really didn't like about Philip specifically, because I feel like when I lay it out like this, Philip sounds like an average Thomas character to the common person, and that's a valid thing to think. So, why do fans dislike him? Well, I think one big thing is Philip's overprominence. He appeared pretty significantly throughout seasons 19 to 22. While he didn't have the world's largest amount of main roles, only really 5, he did play quite a secondary significance in many other ones, specifically in like Hugo's first episode, where he's one of the main characters to meet Hugo, and he was even discussing Henry's move to Vickerstown with Percy and, well, Henry. So really, even though he wasn't that huge in terms of his main roles, his significant secondary roles pushed him over the edge. Not to mention, Philip consistently kept getting new merchandise throughout that time period, and the previously mentioned Creator Collective, which especially used him quite a bit. And even the DVD movies, where Great Race had him in a semi-side role with Gordon's story. I mean, he literally goes because he's Sodor's flag carrier. Like, why do they need this? He got a speaking role in Journey Beyond Sodor for some reason. Most other characters in that movie don't even speak. And in Bwubba, he's got a part in the musical role. Again, Philip was just everywhere for a little while. Another big part of Philip's personality is him being hyperactive and talking a lot. I mean, it's even a plot point, a Shed for Edward, that Philip talks too much. And admittedly, that kind of character can be really hard to do. Some fans finding them okay, and others finding them way too annoying. And especially with how much Philip was pushed during this time period, yeah, I could see him getting on a lot of people's nerves on top of that personality trait that they never really went further with. And I especially think the biggest harm Philip did for most fans was he was kind of the reason Edward moved out. Now, I'm sure it wasn't the intention when Philip was first created that him and Edward would be paired up and Edward would leave Tidmouth Sheds, obviously. But it kind of is a sad, rubbing you the wrong way kind of thing about the character, is that unintentionally, most likely at least, was the reason that the fan-beloved first character in the franchise moved out and, well, stopped appearing as frequently afterwards. Again, I don't want to blame the character directly because I really don't think it was the intention from the beginning, but it's still what ended up happening to him, and while Edward does still technically appear in the series, he will never have the same kind of prominence again. And while I don't think it's the direct fault, you could unintentionally blame Philip's mere existence for being that scapegoat on where to write off Edward. In general, it seems like Philip was mainly disliked for being overprominent, having a personality that I don't think really pushed itself to its limits, and indirectly being the reason Edward basically stopped appearing from here on out. Now, do I think Philip should have all of these held against him? Probably. Honestly, some of this is pretty valid. But, I at least will give Mattel the ouncest amount of credit on pushing this character and trying to make him a big deal when they wouldn't really do that with a lot of other cast members that they've specifically created. Heck, I'd argue Philip had more of a personality than Nia, at least. Now, before I really give you my specific thoughts on Philip, I actually asked a couple people to tell me what they thought about Philip real quick, just so that we could have different perspectives from other audience members on if Philip was really worth being this controversial character in the series, or if maybe he's secretly a very underrated character. So let's hear from them now.
Hey, I'm Aaron Williams, and I'll be giving you my opinion on Philip. So, what is there to talk about this Philip guy? Oh, Philip. Okay. Well, I like Philip, in my opinion. I think he's a pretty good character. I mean, not much to say. He's a pretty energetic. He does talk a lot. And I mean, a lot. But I do like the character. And his voice actor does a great job giving us this very youthful, energetic kind of kiddie character. I really love that. I love that very much. While in my opinion, Philip may not be as big as the other characters in the show, he's still a nice addition to the cast. But my only problem with this guy is that he took Edward from me. I'm just kidding.
What is up, guys? Expression64 here. So, Philip is such an interesting character to me. Many find him to be annoying and worthless, but y'all don't see the vision. I'd argue out of all of the season newbies introduced during the CGI era, like Hugo, Carly, Scruff, etc., Philip is probably the second most important one introduced, just right behind Porter, which is a whole nother topic. So, why do I like Philip so much? Philip represents that childlike whimsy in all of us. He's pure and innocent. He also had a pretty interesting arc that went absolutely nowhere. You see, in Philip to the Rescue, Thomas and Edward have a small interaction that not enough people bring up.
That little box cab can be very cheeky sometimes.
Yes, reminds me of a little tank engine who wanted to see the world.
Philip was set up to be the next Thomas. Around the time of his introduction, Mattel had released The Adventure Begins, which retold the origins of Thomas. With the story fresh in our minds, they introduced a brand new young shunter into the Thomas mythos. Just like Thomas, in his introduction, he messes around with Gordon and even saves James. Now, why do I say his arc was wasted? Well, we just saw Thomas's origin, and now there's a new little engine going through similar motions. They later on made Edward a sort of mentor figure for him, but this was a misstep. Instead of Edward, it should have been Thomas. Who better to guide this naive little engine than the original cheeky little engine? Imagine how great an episode of Thomas having to teach Philip an important life lesson could have been. Let's take a look at Philip's number. What if in that episode we see Thomas keep telling him to focus on his work and not to let such trivial things distract him, like the origin of his number? Thomas could go on an arc himself where he gets annoyed at Philip for the constant ramblings behind his number. But then, Thomas has a flashback to his constant ramblings about seeing the world. This inspires Thomas to come to Philip's side, and just like how Edward gave Thomas a chance with the trucks, Thomas would go to Caesar Topham Hatt to ask about his number. I understand we would never see that since Thomas has to be relatable to the young kids, so making him the older figure wouldn't work, but for the series it would have been perfect. I imagine some of the writers wanted to expand on this just a bit more since we see Philip become an important side character after his introduction, but thanks to the revamp with Big World Big Adventures, all of those plans probably fell through. All in all, Philip was a character ripe for fun and new stories and character dynamics, yet we never got to see what that could have been like. At least, he got to carry the Soder flag in the Great Race, and now that is a job truly only Philip could have done.
Hey everyone, it's the Johnny Ground here. Big thanks to SpiderFan2003 for letting me do this. Okay, Philip. I'm just gonna get straight to the point here. I don't mind the guy, but I don't love him. He's a cool character, but not my favorite. But I can understand why people like him. So I'll just say there's not really much for me to say. Like, he's a good character, but I don't really think he's the best. But I'll just get to the point. I think the dynamic he has with the engines are really cool, especially with Toby and definitely Gordon. I like how there's like a big brother, little brother thing there. I think that's pretty cool. I like how sometimes he thinks he knows what's best when he doesn't, like in Great Race with Thomas and Percy talking about Ashima. I think that's pretty interesting. A lot of kids can relate to that. I mean, I know I definitely could. Let's see. Him standing up to bullies a little bit, kind of like, Vinny and Diesel. I think that was pretty cool. Or was it James? I always get the episode mixed up. I get the episode mixed up with one of the fan episodes. Well, one was James, one was Diesel. I don't really remember. And I will say, I do wish, we got a little more of him and Edward, because I really feel like the dynamic could have been really cool, especially with Edward being a mentor to him. I will say, though, I do feel like the fans have done Philip better, especially with how the TCC did it with, funny enough, Diesel 10. I thought that was really well done. But I do think he's again, I don't love him, but I think he's a cool character. Like, after a while, you get used to his voice, and, the kids can kind of see him as a little role model as themselves, and as Philip kind of grows up, so do the kids, and I think that's kind of cool. And like with him kind of wanting to figure out where he came from a little bit, like, with his number 68, I think it was 68. It's been a while since I've seen the episodes. And just stuff like that. I think it's pretty cool. And at the end, it doesn't really matter. He's just happy. He knows where he is, and he's happy where he lives and who he is. And I think that's honestly really cool. There's not really else much I can really talk about Philip. Like, I do like how the engines do to sometimes him saying he didn't win against Gordon when he thought he did. Like, again, it puts a little bit of a child's mind in Philip while he grows up with the characters, and I really like that. And I do feel like, as the character went on, at least for when he did go on, it's really nice to see, him grow up, and I did like that, especially with, him helping engines without even thinking about it, like saving James by accident. Even though saving James by accident, at least I think it's by accident. I haven't seen episodes in a while. I probably should have just watched the episodes. This is my bad. But I thought the way he did that was really well done. And just overall, I think Phillips is an okay character. Again, I don't love him, I don't hate him, but I do understand why there is a lot of people that do like him. And as the show did go on, I did really grow a little bit of attachment to the guy. So that's honestly my opinion. I think Philip's an alright character. I think he's cool, and I do hope, maybe he comes back on Legends Go. I like to see what they could do with him, and his toys are also pretty cool too. So yeah, that's just my opinion on Philip. Back to you, Matt.
And that was the people. So what about me? How do I feel about Philip after all this rambling? I don't mind him. He's got his moments. He's charming, and there's a lot of good potential with him. But they didn't really use him much, and unfortunately he just fell to the wayside by the end. But he at least represents a time where Mattel was more willing to push their characters and not just throw them around as one-off toy characters, and I at least respect Philip in that sense. But still, more could have been done with him. And I hope you all enjoyed this little in-depth look on Philip. I've always wanted to talk about him, as he's a fascinating character to me with how much they pushed him and how wide opinions can be on him. I also wanted to thank ExpressBean64, Aaron Williams, and Stitch Underground for providing the People versus Philip segment of the video. And thanks for tuning in. I hope to see you guys next time. Take care, everyone.